It worked. Hi. This
Hello.
is from Read It Again Bookstore, and we are live. That was a little drama right there. Okay. I missed it. So today I'm here with Denise Heinze, and she wrote The Brief History and True Report of Temperance Flowerdew. It was good.
Thank you.
Give me that face. Okay. So let's do our intro, and then we'll pretend like, you know, this worked perfectly the first time. Hey guys. So Denise, can you tell us about your book?
First of all, thank you, Kim, so much for moderating this event. And thanks to Read It Again Bookstore for hosting the show. I really appreciate you all taking the time to talk to me about my book. And I'm find it very gratifying that in the era of COVID that there is this venue and outlet for me to be able to do this. So the Brief and True Report of Temperance Flowerdew is ostensibly set in Jamestown in the year 1609. That was an especially horrendous year in American history, and it was known as the Starving Time. But the novel itself, the heart of the novel, is the relationship between the two main characters, two remarkable women, Temperance Flowerdew and her servant girl, whom I've named Lily. And I would assume that most people have never heard of Temperance Flowerdew. They certainly don't know anything about the person I've named Lily, because there's just very little in the historical record that tells us anything about either one of them. Temperance Flowerdew, we know a little bit more about because she was married to the first two colonial governors of Virginia and became sort of an important and wealthy woman in her own right. So we know a little bit about her by virtue of her relationship with these powerful men. Lily, however, we know nothing about except that her remains, like so many others at Jamestown, were unearthed in an archaeological dig. So my goal, after I learned about the Starving Time on a history documentary, then Temperance Flowerdew, and then read this article about this archaeological find, I realized that I had to create or imagine a space for these two women because there is nothing literally there that speaks to their lives and how utterly important and critical they were to Jamestown. And so we wouldn't know that because they pretty much disappeared from the record. And so what I wanted to do as a novelist is to imagine them into being and give them a voice, hopefully for the ages.
Very cool. Okay. And you're going to read to us a little bit?
I am.
Yeah. Can you set it up?
Pardon me?
Do you want to set up your reading, or do you want to just dive into it?
Yes, I'll set it up. Thanks. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first three entries in Temperance's report, and it's in her own voice. And the novel begins in 1628, a few years after the Starving Time, and it's Christmas Eve. Temperance Flowerdew is now married a second time to the second colonial governor of Virginia, and she is pregnant with her fourth child. The pregnancy is not going well, and she's afraid that if she doesn't get what happened to her in 1609 on record, it might be gone forever. So there's a real urgency for her to clear her conscience about the events of this period in her life. So I'm going to read the first three entries. The story I'm about to relate is true. It is not a pretty story. Were it so, I should not hesitate to make it known. But these are the facts, ugly and vile as they may be, and cannot, at least not now, become part of the public record. Such an untoward attestation would destroy not only the reputation of my husbands, the first governors of Virginia, George Yeardley, recently deceased, and Francis West. It would also threaten the bone and sinew of Jamestown, a suckling babe in a savage wilderness. Much is already known of our brave little settlement, whose brief history has been amply recorded and, dare I say, amplified by our readers in various works, not the least of which are those of the Honorable John Smith, the most prolific of the lot. Other accounts that have followed, whilst laden with salacious bits fed to English readers ravenous for adventure, are woefully lacking in certain crucial particulars, one of which compels, nay, commands, that I take up the pen. In so doing, I am aware that I stand accused of transgressing, for God did not intend for the weaker sex to write. Neither did God, I am fairly sure, though I am no Puritan, intend for women to sport the corset or the bodice, but these are items which gentlemen seem far more loath for their ladies to forbear. Write I shall, without permission or apology, not for myself, not even for all women, a presumptuous task that is beyond my ken. I seek only to honor one unsung woman to whom we all owe, a debt of gratitude. For without her, Jamestown might well have gone the way of the lost colony. Those of my generation who find such feminine efforts repugnant will be spared the ignominy, but also the glory of what I am about to reveal. Once completed, this testament will be locked up and hidden until, God willing, such a day arises in the distant future when it is recovered and the annals of Jamestown history are complete. I pray God will forgive me for my dissembling, for I seek to disclose, but also to withhold. I do not claim courage or fortitude as a motive for recording my story, for it will not in my lifetime, nor those of my children, see light of day. Rather, I am driven only by great urgency. For as much as I wish to ensure the survival of His Majesty's footprint in the New World and to protect my family, I bear witness in secrecy, but bear it nevertheless for an entirely different reason. I am soon to die. The child in my belly is most intent, I am certain, on returning to his heavenly Father's loving arms, and will not be content unless I am in tow. My womb is sorely infected, and I have the ague. My husband Francis, with whom I have shared a marriage bed for less than a year, refuses to accept my prognostications. It is no matter. His tender mercies will not alter my affliction, and I must make haste. The truth must be told ere I die with it.
Dun, dun, dun. So you do have a beautiful way with words.
Thank you.
You really do. Okay. Where did you get the idea for this book? I think you kind of went over it earlier, but can you expand?
I did. I actually watched a documentary on the History Channel, and it focused on the starving time. And as so often happens with me, when I see something that fascinating, I just have to find out more about it. Mm-hmm. And so that led to a couple of searches, and I learned quickly about Temperance Flowerdew, and I thought, wow, who is she, and how come her name is so alien to me? There were very few women in Jamestown in those early years, but she was one of the most important and prominent ones. So after that, I kept reading, kept digging, and that led to an article about a recent archaeological dig at Jamestown, the unearthing of skeletal remains. And I knew in that moment I had a novel, and all that would proceed from there would be me researching and then waiting for that moment at which all that information I was inputting would start to bubble over, and I would start writing, because typically that's how it happens with me. Mm-hmm. I read and read and read until I'm sated almost, and then I say that's enough, and then I start. And usually it's at a point where I can't find out anything else, that the information keeps repeating itself. Mm-hmm. And so there's a wall that I hit, and I know that that's the point at which I've got to step in and imagine the rest.
So Temperance, so she went over, this is what struck me. She went over as a single woman, right? She didn't go with her family. She went by herself?
Yes. There are some there is some indication that she may have been married, but the records are not real clear on that point. Then a man named Richard Barrow, and he may have gone with her on the journey, but died at sea, and so she may have been a widow. But what I opted for was to portray her as a single woman because I didn't know for sure.
Yeah, because I find it hard to believe like her parents would let her go.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't let my 17-year-old daughter do that.
Yeah, but then that raises the issue about some of the other women who were gentlewomen who did apparently come alone or were attached to a retinue, perhaps, and that would include Lily. I mean, what were her circumstances such that she opted to go on this really dangerous journey to this wilderness, even though she wasn't attached to anybody that I know of. So there are a lot of questions there, but
a lot of great questions.
That makes it really interesting.
So, how much of this is true? How much of your book?
I guess if I had to give a percentage, 50%.
50%. I'll take that. So, okay, what in the book was like surprisingly true? Like, okay, like the pond and the tripping on mushrooms part. Did you do that, or
that was totally made up? Though I did understand that that these people had to forage for whatever they could find. So it wasn't too much of a stretch to think that they would be out in the woods looking for mushrooms to eat. That included a lot of really interesting research about what was poisonous and what wasn't, and what had a sort of a narcotic effect and which one didn't. But yeah, so I'd give that a 50% too. 50% true, 50% of it I made up. I don't know that Lily ran into Pocahontas, whose real name actually is Mata Aka, but that part was made up.
Okay.
I don't know if we ever met.
Did she actually meet Pocahontas? So, and I remember in high school reading excerpts of John Smith's autobiography that he wrote in the third person. So, how much of him was real?
I would say all of the historical facts were true to what we know about him.
Okay.
And the conversations between Temperance and John Smith were totally made up.
Okay.
Whole cloth.
Okay. And so she really was one of the first women in the colony. And then she did marry the two first governors.
She did.
Huh. Oh. Kind of think maybe she's the power behind the throne then, right? Because if she married two governors, if she'd married a third, he'd probably be governor as well.
Yeah, well, she was very shrewd, I think, in who she chose as a mate.
So you did your research mostly online. Was this book different from writing Sally St. John's?
Very different. Yeah. Did you read Sally St. John's?
Not yet.
Okay. Sally St. John's was sort of a lark. My goal was literary fiction, and my inclination was historical fiction. And I had been doing that for years, honing my craft. And I kind of suffered a little bit of burnout. And so I read a novel by Percival Everett named I Am Not Cindy Poitier, which was hilarious and great fun. And I said, I'm going to try that just to have fun, but also to tackle a serious topic kind of through the back door, because sometimes laughter is one way we get people to see truths that are too painful without it. So Sally St. John's is quite a departure from most of what I've written. And I loved writing it. It was wonderful. And it was an elixir because it helped me jumpstart my enthusiasm again for writing the next book, which turned out to be Temperance.
So who is your favorite character in Temperance?
That's a tough one. Probably Lily.
Lily.
Yeah, I'm not like her. We're not similar in many ways, but I think that uh, my heart goes to her because she was a person who understood the true nature of service and sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was frustrated with Temperance when she said, like, I don't want to learn these things. I want to do A, B, and C instead. And I found that frustrating. I just obviously did not. She was very smart, but did she really realize the winter that was coming?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
I just
and
want to read my books. Leave me alone.
right, and Lily's pretty much telling her you can't do that and survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is a sort of a dynamic relationship between the two because Temperance has skills that Lily doesn't
Mm-hmm.
and has advantages, one of which is her status in English society that gives her the ability to sort of negotiate this hierarchy and inveigle her way into certain situations that might otherwise be closed to women of a different class.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Lily understands that on a basic level, they've got to find food and they've got to survive.
Mm-hmm. Um,
And at a certain point in the novel, of course, Lily becomes more important than Temperance in terms of her skill sets.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you call, what do you call that winter? The what?
The starving time.
Starving time. So that can you talk a little bit about the starving time?
During the starving time, the settlers in the Jamestown settlement, who already were suffering from food deprivation, were suddenly under siege by the Powhatans, the Native Americans in coastal Virginia. The Powhatans had kind of propped up the settlement for a couple of years to this point, until finally the Powhatans said, wait a minute, we're giving you food at the expense of our own people.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to become a little belligerent and confrontational. And the Powhatans said, that's enough. And we're going to surround them. And then they're going to just starve to death. So there they are for months inside this compound. They can't go outside the walls because they'll get slaughtered. They can't really create food inside the walls because they just don't have enough room. It's a very small area, maybe a couple of acres. So they pretty much are living on what they have stored up and the small kitchen gardens they might have throughout the settlement. And so slowly but surely the food supply diminishes and it becomes very dire. People start dying off like flies. In fact, the biggest activity is pretty much burying people on the property, on the grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine what kinds of things they might have resorted to in order to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time that they are finally released from the siege, nearly 2/3 of them have died.
Mm.
But that was, I tell you what, to try to imagine what it would be like to feel that, to feel starvation was not only an unpleasant situation, but a very challenging one. We all understand what hunger feels like, maybe sometimes even extreme hunger, but I don't know that many people in contemporary society understand starvation to the point at which your body begins to consume itself. And what do you do in that situation? What does it do to your psyche, your emotional state, your physical well-being, and even your will to live?
Mm-hmm.
How basic food is to your well-being. We somewhat take it for granted, I think, in our culture, but then it was literally life or death. And for so many of the settlers, it was death.
Mm. So my family and I, we went to Fort Fernandina down in where is that, St. Simon's, and it was an English colony. And I was just they told us that the English colony, they didn't produce their own stuff. Like they got everything from overseas, and then they had it in their colony. So like if they needed metal, they had the metal brought in, and then they worked it there. And I was just like, but you're on a perfectly good piece of land. Why aren't you doing it yourself? They weren't self-sufficient. And I was just so surprised that they weren't self-sufficient. And then reading your book, it felt similar.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you talk about Temperance with her nose in the book, well, she also was very shrewd in understanding the layout of the settlement. When she first gets there, Cord, the master gardener or farmer, gives her a tour of the settlement, and she's aghast at the ways in which the English have not capitalized on the natural resources. Mm-hmm. And she's, for example, there's only one freshwater well that is going dry because there's a drought. Mm-hmm. And so here they are surrounded by this marshy salt water that they can't drink, and it'll make them sick. And yet they've only got one well, and it goes on and on and on, such that the nets in the river are rotted, so they can't catch fish, and they let the hogs loose. And so there's one disaster after another that is just, to us again as readers, is it's just almost incredulous.
Did you go to Jamestown when you were researching this? Have you been to Jamestown?
I did. Yeah, it was really wonderful and fascinating. Yeah, they've got two areas. One is the original site, and there's not much on it because there are so many digs going on. And there are a couple of structures, a mud and stick hut, and the remains of the church. But you can see the James River, which of course flows out to the Chesapeake Bay, and you can look inland, and it really gives you a sense of just how small it was, and what they were, and how this tiny little settlement, and what they were up against in order to survive. There is a reconstruction of the Jamestown village, which I didn't visit because I didn't want it to interfere with how I imagined the original colony. You're
going to go back now and visit that?
Yes.
Yes. That'd be a fun photo shoot with your books.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That would be fun. I'm sure they have a gift shop. Be like, you need to sell this here.
Here, I'll take you with me, Kim.
Well, totally be your promoter. You do it. Can you send us some book plates? I forgot to ask that before.
I didn't receive any to sign, so I don't know.
We'll figure it out. Because, guys, we have this book in stock, and I highly recommend it. It was very good. And what I also like about it is it's a lot of book in a small space. And those are my favorite, because that means each word counts. Each word is important. It's not going on and on about like silly things. Each word actually says something. And those are my favorite books. So speaking of favorite books, do you want to pretend to be a bookseller for a few minutes and recommend something to read?
Sure.
Okay, so what do you want to start with?
Well, two of my favorite classics, like so many of your patrons and viewers and readers have read these, but Jane Eyre's one I read as a kid, and it was one of the first books where I realized what books could do. I mean, I read The Cat in the Hat, which I loved, but it was Jane Eyre when I was a little bit older that just made me realize how you can escape into another time and place and not have to worry about a time machine being constructed, because the authors created it for me in the pages of the novel.
When was the last time you reread Jane Eyre?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, but you can read these books at every point in your life.
And I love Jane Eyre. It's one of my favorites, but I have this theory that when you read it as a 17-year-old, you're like, oh, what's his name? Rochester? Yes. Oh, he's so dreamy. And then you read it as an adult and you're like, oh my gosh, he's crazy. He's got his wife in the attic. Yeah. And it's just one of those books that when you read as a kid and then you read as an adult, they're so different.
Right. Right. Yes.
Like Rebecca, yeah, it's the same way. They're good books. It's just when you were younger, you were a different person than when you're older, and you look at it differently. Yeah.
Right. And you start to have sympathy for, is it Bertha?
Yeah.
Who's in the attic?
Yeah. You're like, I get the wife. What's wrong? The wife, she's not.
Because when you're younger, you're like, oh, she's the
villain,
the monster. She's destroying everything. But as you get older, you realize she's a mad woman in the attic. To paraphrase, I think it's Susan Gilbert. But she's the woman who really is the aggrieved party in this whole deal.
I love that book, and I like also how it's like 3 books in one. Like the modern day writer would probably put that into a trilogy. They wouldn't just do it all in one.
Yeah. Wow. That's probably true.
Yeah. So what's your next book?
Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I mean, that I just got lost in that novel. It's been a long time since I've read it, and it's a really big book, and it takes a long time, but I didn't want it to end. And I just thought I knew what it would be like to be in 19th century Russia after reading it. And so for that reason, that's on the list. But more contemporary novels would include, one of my all-time sentimental favorites is A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines.
I've never read that one.
Have you read that one? It's just exquisitely well written, kind of in the style of Hemingway. There's this spare, clean prose, and yet it's so powerful. And when I was a professor, I taught it every chance I got. And I would tell students, this book may look easy to read, but you try to write prose that clean and crisp and powerful, and you'll see how difficult it is to do that. But it's the story of a young man who's wrongly accused of murder, and his teacher is asked to go visit him so that he will realize that he is a man before he is executed. And this is an important point in this novel because the main characters are African American, and the young man who's wrongly convicted of murder, the only defense his attorney put forward was that he wasn't human, he was an animal and didn't know what he was doing. So the convicted young man's aunt enlists the aid of this school teacher to teach the young man that he is indeed human before he is executed.
They read it in school around here. I sell it all the time, but I've never actually picked it up. Okay, what else is on your list?
Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon.
Oh, I love Toni Morrison. Oh my goodness.
I think most people would choose Beloved because that's her magnus opus. I mean, it's one of the greatest achievements, I think, in literature. But my personal favorite and sentimental favorite is Song of Solomon. Just this beautiful book about the rite of passage of an African-American male as he travels north to south in search of his ancestors and finds out that he is connected to a tribe of incredible Africans. And I won't say much more than that because I don't want to spoil the ending if you've never read it.
I love her. Yeah, no, Beloved is my favorite, but it was taught in college. Like we read it as a book in one of my language arts classes. And so we dissected the crap out of that, and I loved it. It was so good. Yeah.
I was introduced to Toni Morrison when I was deciding on my master's thesis at North Carolina Central University. And my thesis advisor, I said, who should I write my thesis on? I mean, that's a real mature approach to my advanced degree work. And he said, Toni Morrison. I said, who's he? And he just laughed and waved at me and he said, go read Song of Solomon. And I did. And that was all she wrote.
That was, gosh, beautiful. I thought you said you met her. I was about to freak out, but then I realized, you met her books. So.
Yes, I have been in her company a few times, but never actually had a conversation with her, which I regret to this day.
You shared the air with her, which is not something we're supposed to do anymore, but you did it. Oh, what's next on your list?
Well, I just finished reading Orphan Train by Christina Baker, and Baker Klein, and I just thought that was a page turner. Couldn't put it down. About another remarkable era in American history that involved these orphans who were shipped across the country to relocate with families in the Midwest and further in the plains.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a really fascinating, well-written work that I thoroughly enjoyed.
We were talking about that before we went on. It was 250,000 kids were relocated? That's just staggering.
Yeah. And you can imagine some of that there were probably some really fabulous success stories, but also there were some children who were exploited, and therein lies the rub in terms of this novel.
Yeah, the first time I read anything about the children being sent over was a book called Rodzilla, which is a kid's book about a young girl who was an orphan, and she was on the train and nobody wanted her. And in the end, I'm giving it away, the woman in charge of the orphans adopted her. And I love that. And I read that as an adult. And that was the first time I ever heard of it. Yeah. So, okay, what's next?
Swimming Between Worlds by Elaine Neal Orr. Mm-hmm. And what's really, it's another piece of historical fiction. And it's beautifully written. But in addition to that, it looks at the intermingling of two cultures, an African culture and American culture in the late 50s, early 60s during the advent of the civil rights movement. And so I just love that perspective of these two cultures and the ways in which persons of color in Africa had to deal with some of the same issues that persons of color in the United States went through. So it's a well-written story, but also about critical social and cultural issues.
No, I've never read that one, so I'm definitely adding that to my list. Okay, what's next? Is that it? Oh, wait, there was one more. News of the World.
Oh, yeah, that was fantastic.
We up ahead of time. She sent me a list. It's awesome because sometimes I don't get a list, and I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that was a great book. I just love the relationship between the. It's been a while since I read it, so help me out here. But between the main character, the elder gentleman, and the young girl.
I know it's a big hit here in the store. It's like one of Terry's favorite, and we always recommend it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just loved it.
So what are you working on now?
I'm actually working on doing my best to get the word out about temperance. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a particular project in mind. I do have some manuscripts that I might revisit and edit, and that is historical fiction. Mm-hmm. One I've called Spellcaster, and it's about my grandparents who met in New Mexico at the turn of the 20th century. And my grandmother taught the Navajo, and my grandfather was the first, well, not the first mayor of Gallup, New Mexico, but he was a mayor of Gallup, New Mexico. So I tell the story of their relationship, their romance, their marriage, and what happens to them. So that is personal to me.
Yeah.
And so I might revisit that one.
I'll read it. I'll read anything you write. This was really good. I enjoyed it. So yeah, just bring it. I'll read it. I'll read it and I'll sell it. So
great.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Denise, for this. This has been a lot of fun. I actually enjoyed talking to you, and I'm really sorry we had messed up in the beginning. It's the first time we've had a major mess up. So I've done like 60 something of these. So that's pretty good.
It is.
Yeah. So if you're ever you live in North Carolina, so I don't even think I introduced you. Holy moly. Okay, wait a minute. Okay. Denise Heinze is an award-winning author who has published scholarly work, essays, memoirs, poetry, and fiction. Her debut novel, Sally St. John's, is wickedly funny eco-thriller that dramatizes the deadly seriousness of global warming. The brief and true report, A Temperance Flowerdew, was a finalist in the University of New Orleans Press Publishing Lab Prize. She is a descendant of Louisa May Alcott, and she lives in North Carolina. There we go. Better late than never. So
well done.
You're in North Carolina. You could be anywhere from like 5 hours to an hour away from us. When things get a little better, you should come visit.
I can't wait to see your bookstore.
Yeah, we have a wall that you can sign, an author's wall, and then you can sign our stock. And I'll just show you around, and we can talk about books for hours. It'll be fun.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. We have copies of Temperance Flowerdew in stock, so please order them. Order them from your local independent bookstore. If it's not us, find one. If it is us, we would love to meet your book needs. So give us a call or go on our website. And well, anyway, good night, guys. Thank you.